It was Thursday recess time at Andrew Jackson Public School. Teacher Claudia Sanders, as always, grabbed her faded blue lunchbox and left the teacher's lounge, heading toward the small backyard courtyard. Always the same ritual. Always alone. Always hidden. The 7th grade students had noticed this strange behavior for months. But it was only when Lucas, a curious 12-year-old boy, decided to secretly follow the teacher that they discovered the truth. And what he saw through the window of the empty classroom where she hid to eat made his heart ache in a way he would never forget. The lunchbox was practically empty. Just a few loose grains of rice and a tiny piece of egg. That was it. That was all Teacher Claudia ate every day. Claudia Sanders was 34 years old but looked older. Her face bore premature wrinkles from someone who slept little and worried a lot. Her brown hair always tied in a simple ponytail, some grey streaks already appearing at her temples. Her clothes were always the same, 5 or 6 pieces rotating all week, washed and ironed with care, but visibly old and worn. Her shoes were worn-out black loafers, the soles almost smooth, but it was her smile that stood out. Despite everything, Claudia always smiled at her students. She taught English and literature to 7th and 8th grade classes. She was known as a dedicated, patient teacher who stayed after class helping those who had difficulty. She never missed a day, even when she was visibly sick. She brought books from her own home, already old and with yellowed pages, to lend to students who couldn't afford to buy them. She graded tests and assignments with meticulous attention, leaving encouraging comments in the margins. If you want to discover why Teacher Claudia brought that lunchbox every day, and what really happened when the students discovered the truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive more emotional stories like this one. Now let me tell you this story from the beginning. Andrew Jackson Public School was located on the south side of Chicago, in the Bridgeport neighborhood. It was a 3-story building, painted in a faded yellow tone that hadn't seen renovations in years. The classrooms had old fans that made more noise than wind, windows with broken panes covered with cardboard, and desks scratched with generations of student names carved into the wood. But inside, teachers like Claudia worked magic every day. Claudia lived in a tiny rented house in back of the yards, 40 minutes by bus from the school. She woke up every day at 5 in the morning. She took a cold shower because the electric heater had been broken for months and she didn't have the money to fix it. She dressed in the dark so as not to wake the children. She prepared simple coffee and bread with margarine when she had it. She left everything arranged on the kitchen table for the children to eat when they woke up, because Claudia was a widow and mother of 3 children. Michael was 12, in 7th grade at another school. Anna was 9 in 4th grade. And Peter, the youngest, was only 6 in 1st grade. Her husband, Robert, had passed away 3 years ago in a work accident. He fell from scaffolding at the construction site where he worked as a laborer. Died instantly. There was no insurance. There was no compensation. The construction company was unregistered, illegitimate. Claudia was left alone with 3 small children and a teacher's salary that barely exceeded $3,000 a month. The rent for the little house consumed $1,200. Water, electricity and gas, when there was money to buy the tank, took another $400. Transportation between school bus passes and hers, $300 more. A little over $1,000 were left for food, clothes, school supplies, medicine, everything. It was impossible. Simply impossible. But Claudia made it work, because she had no choice. A mother always finds a way. She cut costs everywhere possible. Cancelled the health insurance they barely used. Cancelled the internet. The television stayed off to save energy. They didn't buy new clothes, only from thrift stores when extremely necessary. Shoes were worn until they completely disintegrated. School supplies were reused until the last centimeter of notebook. And the food. The food was the biggest sacrifice. Claudia worked miracles with rice, beans, and eggs. She bought the cheapest cuts of chicken, often just bones with a little meat, and made broths that stretched. Potatoes, carrots, and squash were the vegetables that fit the budget. Red meat was a luxury they hadn't seen in months. Fruits only when they were on clearance sale at the end of the farmer's market. And even so, even with all the economizing, at the end of the month, the money ran out before the food. It was about 6 months ago that Claudia made a silent and devastating decision. She started skipping meals. First it was breakfast. She told her children she ate at school. Then it was dinner. She said she wasn't hungry, that she had eaten a lot at lunch, But the truth was, she saved her portion for the children. She divided what would be hers among the three. She made sure they had enough, even if that meant she would have nothing. At first, her body complained. Hunger was a constant physical pain, gnawing from the inside like a wild animal. Frequent dizziness, weakness in her legs, difficulty concentrating, but with time the body got used to it. The pain of hunger became a constant companion she learned to ignore. What she couldn't ignore was the sparkle in her children's eyes when they had enough food on their plates. That was worth any sacrifice. To keep up appearances at school, Claudia started bringing a lunchbox every day. It was the same blue plastic lunchbox she used before Robert died, when there was enough food for everyone. But now she put only the minimum inside. A few grains of rice, a tiny piece of something, enough to pretend she was eating if someone glanced, but never enough to actually nourish. She ate alone, hidden, because she didn't want the other teachers to see. She didn't want questions, she didn't want pity. She had pride, even if that pride was literally starving her to death. She went to an empty classroom at the back of the school, sat at one of the desks and slowly ate those few grains of rice, chewing each one as if it were a feast. She drank a lot of water to fill her stomach, and then she went back to teach, smiling as if everything was fine. The students in 7th grade Class C had noticed the teacher's strange behavior for a few months. Lucas was the first. He had always been observant, the kind of kid who notices details others ignore. He noticed that teacher Claudia never ate in the cafeteria with the other teachers. He noticed that she always went to the back of the school with that blue lunchbox. He noticed that she had lost a lot of weight in recent months, her face getting thinner, her clothes increasingly loose. He commented with his friends during recess. Amanda agreed, said she had noticed too. Philip said the teacher always looked tired. Beatrice mentioned that sometimes the teacher stopped mid-explanation and held onto the desk, as if she were about to faint. The whole class started paying attention, and the more they observed, the more worried they became. It was on a Tuesday that they decided to investigate. Lucas convinced 3 friends, Amanda, Philip and Beatrice, to help him. The plan was simple. Follow teacher Claudia during recess and find out what was really in that lunchbox. Why did she hide to eat? What was so secret? The theories were many. Philip thought maybe she ate something strange and was embarrassed. Amanda thought maybe she was sick. Lucas didn't know what to think, but his instinct told him it was something serious. At recess that Tuesday, they put the plan into action. When teacher Claudia picked up her lunchbox and left the teacher's lounge, the 4 followed her from a distance. She crossed the main yard, went through the side corridor and entered an empty classroom at the end of the back hallway. It was a room that wasn't used because it had a leaking ceiling and was condemned for a renovation that never happened. Lucas signaled for the others to wait. He approached the classroom's side window silently. The window was slightly open, with a direct view inside. From where he was, he could perfectly see teacher Claudia sitting at one of the desks, her back to the door, the lunchbox open in front of her. What Lucas saw made his heart ache. The lunchbox was practically empty. He could literally count the grains of rice inside. There couldn't have been more than 2 spoonfuls. There was a tiny piece of egg, the size of a coin, and that was it. Teacher Claudia picked up her fork and started eating slowly, chewing each grain of rice as if it were precious. Her hand trembled slightly. Lucas could see, even from afar, how thin she was, the bones of her shoulders protruding under her blouse. He moved away from the window and went back to where his friends waited. His face was pale. Amanda asked what he had seen. Lucas tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Finally, his voice choked. He described what he had seen: the practically empty lunchbox, the teacher eating those few grains of rice as if they were treasure, her thinness, the trembling hands. The 4 friends fell silent, processing. Beatrice was the first to speak, her voice coming out in a horrified whisper. She said the teacher was starving. Real hunger. Philip shook his head, not wanting to believe it. Amanda had tears in her eyes. Lucas felt an anger growing inside him. Anger at what? He didn't know. Anger at the injustice. Anger that a teacher so good, so dedicated, was going through that. They went back to the classroom before the teacher. When she entered a few minutes later, smiling as always, asking if everyone had enjoyed recess, the 4 looked at her with new eyes. They saw beyond the smile. They saw the paleness of her skin. They saw the deep, dark circles, They saw the loose clothes on a body that was disappearing, and something inside them changed at that moment. After class, the four gathered under the black cherry tree in the yard. They needed to do something. They couldn't just ignore what they had discovered. But what? Beatrice suggested telling the principal. Philip thought maybe they should talk to their parents. Amanda said they first needed to know more, understand why the teacher was going through that. Lucas agreed. They needed more information before acting. In the following days, the four started observing even more attentively. They noticed that teacher Claudia always refused when another teacher offered a piece of cake or cookie in the teacher's lounge. They noticed she drank a lot of water during the day. They noticed that sometimes she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if she were fighting dizziness. They noticed her hands trembled when she wrote on the board. It was Amanda who had the idea to research the teacher's personal life, not in an invasive way, but by asking subtly. She talked to the math teacher, Ms. Martha, who was Claudia's friend. Skillfully, she asked if teacher Claudia had a family. Martha, suspecting nothing, said yes, that Claudia was a widow and had 3 children, that she raised the 3 alone, that it was very difficult on a teacher's salary, that she admired Claudia's strength. Amanda returned to her friends with this information. The pieces began to fit together. Widow, 3 children, teacher's salary. Now it made sense. Teacher Claudia wasn't eating so she could feed her children. She was sacrificing herself so they would have food. The discovery was like a punch in the stomach for all 4. Lucas went home that day and couldn't eat dinner. His mother asked if he was sick. He shook his head but pushed away the plate full of rice, beans, steak, and salad. How could he eat that knowing his teacher was hungry? His mother was worried, but he just said he wasn't hungry. He went to his room and cried, alone, for the first time in years. Amanda did the same. She looked at the plate of food and felt guilty. Guilty for having food when the teacher didn't. Her older sister, who was in high school, noticed something was wrong and asked. Amanda ended up telling everything. Her sister was shocked, said they needed to do something. But what? It was Philip who had the idea that would change everything. He said they needed to tell the entire class, mobilize all the students. If each one did a little, they could help a lot. Lucas immediately agreed. Beatrice did too. Amanda thought it was a great idea. The next day, before teacher Claudia's class, the 4 talked to the rest of the class. They told everything they had discovered. The practically empty lunchbox. The teacher eating alone, hidden, her thinness. The fact she was a widow with 3 children and a low salary. The room fell into absolute silence. Some students had tears in their eyes. Others were incredulous. But all, without exception, agreed they needed to help. But how to help without embarrassing the teacher? She clearly had pride. Otherwise she wouldn't hide to eat. If they simply offered food, she would probably refuse. They needed to be smart, subtle, respectful. The next half hour was spent devising a plan. Gabriella, a quiet girl who normally didn't speak much, timidly raised her hand and made a suggestion. She said they could start by bringing extra snacks and discreetly leaving them on the teacher's desk. Say they had leftovers and didn't want to throw them away. The teacher might accept if it was presented that way, as something that would be wasted anyway. The whole class agreed it was a good initial idea. The next day, the operation began. Amanda brought an extra cheese muffin her mom made. At the end of class, she placed it on the teacher's desk and said casually that her mom always made too much, and it would spoil if not eaten soon, if the teacher could accept it so it wouldn't go to waste. Claudia hesitated, but then smiled and thanked her, putting the muffin in her bag. Philip did the same the next day with a banana, said he had brought 2 but only ate 1, and fruit spoils quickly. Beatrice brought homemade cookies. Lucas brought a sandwich. One by one the students started bringing things, always with excuses that it would spoil, that their mom made too much, that they wouldn't be able to eat it all. Claudia accepted, always with that grateful smile, without suspecting. She took everything home, shared it with her children, but the students noticed she still wasn't eating properly. The blue lunchbox still came practically empty. She still hid. She was still thin and pale. They needed something bigger, much bigger. It was then that Lucas had a bold idea. He said they should organize a fundraiser, not to give money directly to the teacher, because she would probably refuse, but to buy monthly food baskets in her name, get a partner market to deliver to her house. It would be anonymous. She wouldn't know who was helping. She couldn't refuse. The whole class loved the idea, but they needed to involve more people. Just one class wouldn't be able to raise enough. They needed the whole school. Lucas proposed talking to the student council. Amanda suggested involving other classes directly. Philip said they could do a presentation during recess, use the yard microphone. But before we continue and discover how this story ended, and what happened when teacher Claudia found out what the students were doing, leave your like here in the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and hit the bell so you don't miss any new stories. Also tell me, have you ever faced serious financial difficulties? Have you ever had to choose between eating or paying bills? How did you deal with it? Share in the comments, your story might help someone. And also tell me which city you're watching this video from, and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. Now let's get back to our story. The mobilization was quick and emotional. Lucas and his friends looked for the student council president, a third-year girl named Julia. They told her everything about teacher Claudia. Julia was visibly moved, said she knew the teacher, that she had been her English teacher a few years ago. She was one of the best teachers in the school. Of course she would help. Julia called an emergency student council meeting. There were 7 students from different grades. All immediately agreed to help. They decided to make an official campaign, approved by the school, but for that, they needed to involve the administration. And that's where the problem began. How to convince the principal without exposing teacher Claudia. The school principal, Ms. Regina, was a woman in her 50s, strict but fair. She had run that school for 12 years, dealing with all the problems that public schools in underprivileged areas face. Lack of funding, dilapidated infrastructure, violence, dropout rates. But she genuinely cared about her students and teachers. Julia scheduled a meeting. They entered the principal's office on Friday after school. Lucas, Amanda, Philip, Beatrice, and Julia. Ms. Regina received them with curiosity. Students rarely asked for a formal meeting. Julia took a deep breath and told everything. The lunchbox, the hunger, the widowhood, the 3 children, teacher Claudia's silent sacrifice. As she spoke, the principal's expression changed from curiosity to shock, then to a deep sadness. When Julia finished, Ms. Regina was silent for a long moment. Her eyes were moist. She took off her glasses and cleaned the lenses, clearly trying to compose herself. Finally she spoke, her voice hoarse with emotion. She said she didn't know, that Claudia had never asked for help, had never let the gravity of the situation show. She said that as a principal she felt guilty for not having noticed, but quickly the guilt turned into determination. Ms. Regina hit the desk decisively. She said they would do more than a simple fundraiser. They would do a complete help campaign. They would involve not only the school, but the entire neighborhood community. They would get commercial partners. They would hold fundraising events. They would help not only with food, but structurally, so Claudia could regain her dignity and health. In the following days, the school became a beehive of organization. Ms. Regina called a meeting with all teachers and staff. She explained the situation, careful to do it respectfully, emphasizing Claudia's strength and dedication, not just her difficulty. The teachers were shocked. Many cried. Some felt guilty for not having noticed, but all, without exception, offered to help. They assembled a task force. Mr. Edward, the math teacher, who was good with numbers, was responsible for finances and contacting markets for donations. Ms. Martha, Claudia's friend, would be the link, ensuring Claudia wouldn't suspect until the right time to reveal. The physical education teacher, Ms. Renee, would organize fundraising sports events. The custodian, Mr. Anthony, who knew everyone in the neighborhood, would mobilize the local community. The students were divided into committees. One group was responsible for making posters and publicity, another for organizing a bake sale to sell during recess, another for creating a social media page telling the story without photos or the teacher's name to maintain privacy, and asking for donations. The student council centralized everything. The response was overwhelming. When the story began to circulate through the neighborhood by word of mouth and social media, people mobilized. The owner of the corner bakery donated 50 pounds of bread for the bake sale. The local grocery store committed to donating a complete food basket monthly for a year. The pharmacy offered discounts on any medication Claudia or the children needed. The clothing store downtown donated bags of clothes for the children, but they still needed money to do something more permanent. They organized a school fair on Saturday. They sold sweets, snacks, homemade cakes, crafts made by students, raffles. They held dance and music performances. The whole community showed up. Former students of teacher Claudia, some already adults with children of their own, came back to help. They told stories of how important she had been in their lives, how her encouragement had made a difference. During all this, they kept Claudia in the dark. They made up excuses for the events, said it was a student council project for school renovations. She didn't suspect, too busy trying to survive day by day, besides continuing to teach her classes with the same dedication as always, despite her growing weakness. But it was impossible to keep it a complete secret in a school. Gradually, rumors reached Claudia's ears. Someone mentioned a campaign. Another student commented something about helping a teacher. Claudia began to get suspicious. On Thursday of the second week of the campaign, she went to Ms. Martha and asked directly if something was happening that she should know about. Martha was in a dilemma: lie to her friend or tell the truth before planned. She decided on a middle ground, said yes, there was a campaign, but asked Claudia to trust her, that everything would be revealed soon, that it wasn't anything bad, quite the opposite, that she just needed to be patient. Claudia was even more confused, but agreed to wait. The moment of revelation was scheduled for Friday, exactly 3 weeks after Lucas discovered the empty lunchbox. They set everything up as a surprise. Ms. Regina called Claudia for a meeting in her office after the last class, said they needed to talk about a student's performance. Claudia, unsuspecting, went. When she entered the principal's office, she found not only the principal, but all the teachers, the staff, and representatives from each class in the school. There was a table covered with a cloth, hiding something underneath. Claudia stopped at the door, confused, her heart starting to beat faster. Her eyes passed over all the faces, trying to understand what was happening. Ms. Regina approached, gently took Claudia's arm and guided her into the room, asked her to sit down. Claudia obeyed, her legs shaking, 1,000 thoughts running through her head. Had she done something wrong? Was she being fired? But then, why was everyone smiling? It was Lucas who spoke first. He stepped forward, Amanda, Philip, and Beatrice by his side. In a firm but emotional voice, he told everything. How they had noticed she always ate alone. How they had followed her and seen the practically empty lunchbox. How they discovered she was a widow with 3 children. How they realized she was starving to feed the children. And how they couldn't just stand by and do nothing. While Lucas spoke, Claudia's face went through a progression of emotions. Surprise, shame, embarrassment. And then tears. Tears that began to fall silently, streaming down her thin cheeks. She tried to speak, to say it wasn't that bad, that she was fine. But her voice wouldn't come out. Only silent sobs. Julia, from the student council, continued. Explained how they mobilized the whole school, how the community came together, how everyone wanted to help because she was a wonderful teacher, a wonderful person who deserved that help. That it wasn't pity, it was gratitude, it was love, it was recognition for everything she did for them every day. Ms. Regina then pulled the cloth off the table. Underneath was a pile of things. Food baskets, 5 in total, complete and huge. Grocery vouchers totaling $2,000. An envelope with $3,000 in cash raised at the fair. Bags of new clothes for Michael, Anna, and Peter. Complete school supplies for all 3. And a letter, signed by all the students and teachers of the school, with messages of affection and support. Furthermore, Ms. Regina announced she had spoken with the Department of Education. She had secured emergency aid for teachers in vulnerable situations, a stipend of $1,000 a month for 6 months. She also secured a spot in a better quality public daycare for Peter, closer to home, saving on transportation. And the local grocery store was committed to monthly food baskets for a year. Claudia broke down, simply broke down, covered her face with her hands and cried as she hadn't cried since the day Robert died. She cried with relief. She cried with shame for having hidden her situation. She cried with gratitude that so many people cared. She cried because finally, she could eat without guilt, could feed her children and herself, could breathe without that constant weight of not knowing how she would survive until the end of the month. Amanda was the first to hug her, then Beatrice, then Lucas and Philip, then every student present, then the teachers, then the staff. It was a collective hug, everyone squeezed into that small room, crying together, laughing together. It was one of the most beautiful moments that school had seen in its 40 years of existence. When she finally managed to speak, Claudia said she didn't know how to thank them, that she was ashamed for having hidden it, for not asking for help. Ms. Regina gently interrupted her, said there was nothing shameful about going through hard times, that the United States was full of teachers in the same situation, honest workers who could barely survive, that the shame belonged to the system that paid such important professionals so poorly, that Claudia should never ever feel ashamed of her situation. Lucas said something that would be etched in Claudia's memory forever. He said she always taught them the importance of literature, reading, knowledge, but that in the last few weeks she had taught them something much more important. She taught them about empathy, about paying attention to the suffering of others, about acting when we see injustice, about community and solidarity, that was the most valuable lesson they could learn. The news of what happened spread. A small local newspaper did a report on the school's solidarity without mentioning Claudia's name to preserve her privacy. The story touched hearts. Other schools began doing similar campaigns for teachers in difficulty. The Department of Education, pressured by the repercussion, announced it would study ways to increase support for teachers in vulnerability. For Claudia and her children, life changed drastically. For the first time in years, the refrigerator was full, truly full. Michael, Anna, and Peter couldn't believe it. They looked at all that food as if it were treasure. Claudia made a real dinner that night. Rice, beans, meat, salad, even fruit juice. They sat at the table, the four of them, and before starting to eat, Claudia asked them to hold hands. She said a prayer of gratitude, her voice broken with emotion. The following days were about adapting to a new reality. Claudia ate. She ate for real for the first time in months. Her body found it strange at first, accustomed to deprivation. But little by little it adjusted. She could feel her energy returning. The dizziness decreased. Her hands trembled less. Her face began to regain color. The dark circles, though still present, became less deep. At school, everything changed too. Claudia no longer hid during recess. She accepted the other teachers' invitation to have lunch together in the lounge. Her lunchbox now came full with real food, and she ate without shame, without guilt. The students watched her with discreet smiles, happy to see the teacher was better. The relationship between Claudia and her students deepened. There was now a special connection, a mutual understanding of vulnerability and compassion. She opened up more in the classroom, telling stories from her life, not just teaching English, but teaching about life, about resilience, about dignity and poverty. The students listened fascinated, learning lessons no textbook could teach. Lucas and his friends became especially close to Claudia. She called them her guardian angels. They sometimes visited her after school, helped carry materials, stayed talking about everything and nothing. Amanda brought her mother to meet the teacher, and the two women became friends. Amanda's mother, who was a seamstress, offered to teach Claudia to sew, a way to earn extra income. The following months were about rebuilding. With regular nourishment, Claudia regained weight and health. She got a small extra job tutoring online at night, after the children were asleep, slightly increasing her income. The money raised in the campaign she saved as an emergency fund, so she would never again experience the desperation of having nothing. Michael, her oldest son, was deeply impacted by everything that happened. He saw his mother saved by the kindness of strangers who became family. That changed his worldview. He decided that when he grew up, he wanted to work in social services, help other families like his. Anna and Peter were too young to fully understand, but they felt the difference. Their mother smiled more. The house had food. There was no longer that constant tension in the air. 1 year after the day Lucas discovered the empty lunchbox, the school organized a special event. It was an annual celebration they now held called Gratitude Day. The goal was to celebrate the school community, strengthen bonds, remember that together they were stronger. Claudia was invited to speak. She went up on the small stage set up in the yard, in front of hundreds of students, teachers, parents, and community members. She held a microphone with hands that no longer trembled. She looked at the sea of faces and felt her heart ache with emotion. She began to speak, her voice firm and clear. She told her story without filters, talked about Robert's death, about the struggle to raise 3 children alone on a teacher's salary, about the impossible choice between paying bills or buying food, about the decision to starve so her children could eat, about the shame of hiding it, about that practically empty blue lunchbox she brought every day, pretending everything was fine. And then she talked about what happened next, about 4 curious students who refused to ignore suffering, about a school that mobilized, about a community that came together, about how that not only saved her life, but changed her perspective on the world, about how she learned that asking for help is not weakness, it is courage, that accepting help is not shame, it is humility, that we are all connected, and that our value as a society is measured by how we care for the most vulnerable. As she spoke, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Lucas cried openly. Amanda held her mother's hand, both with tears streaming. Philip and Beatrice hugged, moved. The teachers cried. Principal Regina wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the toughest students, those who pretended not to care about anything, were visibly touched. Claudia finished her speech, saying that school, those people, had given her more than food or money. They had given her hope. They had given her dignity. They had shown that she mattered, that her life had value, that she was not alone. And that was the most precious gift anyone could receive. She thanked, her voice breaking on the last sentence, and came down from the stage to a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. The following years brought significant changes. Claudia's story inspired local public policies. The City Council approved a food support program for public school teachers in vulnerable situations. It wasn't perfect, it didn't solve everything, but it was a start. Other cities began adopting similar programs. Claudia continued teaching, continued being that dedicated, patient teacher who stayed after class helping students. But now she did it without sacrificing herself, without skipping meals, without choosing between eating or paying a bill. She continued bringing her blue lunchbox every day, but now it came full, and she ate in the teacher's lounge with the other teachers, laughing, talking, living. Lucas went on to high school, then to university. He studied journalism, specializing in social reporting. His first major article was about underpaid teachers in America, directly inspired by teacher Claudia's story. Amanda became a nutritionist, working with low-income families to ensure adequate nutrition, even with limited resources. Philip became a teacher too, inspired by Claudia's example. Beatrice studied law, focusing on teachers' labor rights. And the blue lunchbox? Claudia still has it. It's a little older, more scratched, but it still works. She will never throw it away. Keeps it as a memento of the difficult days, yes, but mainly a memento of the day she discovered she was not alone, of the day kindness overcame shame, of the day a community proved that love isn't just a pretty word, but a concrete action that saves lives. Today, when new students enter Teacher Claudia's classroom for the first time, someone always tells the story of the lunchbox, the story of the teacher who starved to feed her children, the story of the students who noticed, cared, and acted. It's a story that became legend in that school, a story that teaches about empathy, about community, about dignity, about love. And every time the story is told, Claudia smiles. That smile she always had, but that now reaches her eyes, because she knows her struggle, her suffering was not in vain. It became a lesson. It became inspiration. It became proof that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, human kindness can light the way, and that teachers, those professionals so financially undervalued, are some of the most valuable humans that exist. They are worth far more than any salary could express. They are worth their weight in gold. They are worth everything. Comment down below. Family is everything. So I know you made it to the end of this video, and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. And if Teacher Claudia's story moved you, I have another one even more surprising to share with you. Just click on the video that's appearing on your screen now, and I'll tell you all about it. A big hug, and see you next time for another emotional story. Bye-bye.